Howdy folks, Kevin here, doing another article read through for you. This time we're going over the article that says asking developers to do QA is broken. Here's why they built, the team behind this article, who is Rainforest QA, they built a product to let anyone own QA. What we're going to focus on is the first part, why asking developers to do QA is broken. Many software companies have no formal quality assurance strategy, and those that do take one of two inherently flawed approaches. Either they ask developers to do QA, or they delegate QA to a siloed team, whether that's internal or outsourced. Having been in the QA space for a decade, the Rainforest QA team has learned that both approaches are deeply flawed. That's interesting to say, considering that this is the approach, like one of these two approaches is probably what your team is taking. As they'll elaborate below, both options create misaligned incentives, lead to finger pointing, waste expensive employee time, reduce job satisfaction, and slow down release schedules. Those are some big claims, but the main one, misaligned incentives, I feel like if I could try to reiterate one thing to any sort of team, misaligned incentives. When you incentivize anything you do, any reward or punishment you give creates an incentive to either do something or not do something, even if you're not meaning to do that. So you could punish certain behavior. Well, that's going to create an incentive to do some other behavior, or there's always unexpected consequences. They go on, these problems are exacerbated. I got that word correct the first time. In software companies running continuous integration right. These problems are exacerbated in software companies running continuous integration and delivery operations where QA testing has to be done continuously. In that case, if developers own QA, they are often incentivized to do as little QA as possible to ship more software. So again, they're talking about misaligned incentives. Why would they be incentivized to do as little QA as possible? Well, they'll get to that in just a second. But if QA is managed by a standalone team, organizational battles can happen thanks to the tension between QA wanting to slow down and get it right versus engineering who wants to ship it faster. But after years of building their own software, the Rainforest QA folks, and helping companies implement testing automation, they've realized that there is a third option made possible by no-code test automation. We won't really talk about no-code in this video. They talk about it in the article later on, but it's related to their product. I don't really want to do a sales pitch for their product. I think it's a good article. It's got some really good tidbits, and I'll share it to you if you want to read it and you want to look at their product. That's great. I don't think that's not the purpose of this video, to show off Rainforest QA. But what they offer is no-code test automation. So instead of writing Selenium or WebdriverIO test code, you are able to use their web interface to create test cases. It's kind of interesting. I'll give a little preview at the end. Anyway, they say when you remove technical barriers to software testing and make it truly accessible, you allow the people with the highest stakes in shipping bug-free products, product managers, designers, QA analysts, and others, to own quality. Kind of funny to be a QA analyst, a quality assurance analyst. Just say QA, I don't know. There's no longer an isolated QA team begging for more transparency into product changes so they can properly update their tests in a timely manner. Plus, thanks to the inherent speed of automation, developers can continue to release as fast and frequently as they want. So they're kind of pitting two things from each other. The QA team wanting more transparency, they'll talk about that, and then developers wanting to go fast and frequent with their releases. We'll skip that. So the problems that arise when developers own quality. So this is taking that first approach of developers own the quality. So what happens when that occurs? Since developers already run unit tests as part of their development process, it makes sense on the surface to put them in charge of QA. Many companies do take this approach. To be fair, having developers own QA does keep them in charge of the release workflow, which is essential in a continuous delivery pipeline. It's true. Developers, if you're having continuous delivery, developers need to be able to work on the QA automation, because developers are going to break the QA automation, and there's not enough QA folks out there to keep it up to date. They need developers' help. So they believe the approach of having solely the developers do QA is inherently flawed because of misaligned incentives. There's that term again. And that these flaws outweigh any benefits of having developers own QA. So what's the first problem they talk about? Developers aren't incentivized to prioritize QA testing. Developers are typically evaluated based on the quantity of software they ship and how fast they ship it. I think a lot of developers are evaluated based on the quality as well, but when it comes down to the business, it's quantity. It's getting features out. Now you want those features to work, but that's kind of given. Even when developers are tasked to do QA, they're still primarily evaluated based on speed. So when they're forced to make trade-offs between speed and the amount of testing done to increase assurance about quality, they're incentivized to favor speed. Yep, that's where that misaligned incentive comes in. You've got two competing interests, quality and speed. You got to find the right balance between the two, but for developers, there's a stronger pull towards speed than there is towards quality. There's still a pull towards quality, so you want to make sure it's there, but it's not quite the same. Every minute spent doing QA is a minute not spent writing code, which means that doing QA becomes an annoying chore in the developer's workday. The more QA they do, the less software they can ship. In practice, this means they're incentivized to only run the bare minimum number of tests to prove that the code is technically sound. Yeah. As a result, when developers are doing QA, they tend to run what are called happy path tests. Does the code work when everything is entered properly into the form? If so, then move on. They don't have time or incentive to test weird edge cases, like a name with non-Roman characters or a bad credit card number, or ordering -1 beers. There's little chance that they'll be able to step back and ask if the end-to-end user flow in the product even makes sense because they're focused on shipping their one section of the product's code. Basically, developers don't have time to do QA to the level that it needs to be done. They can do it to a small level, but not to the level it needs to be done. Second problem is that developers' job satisfaction goes down when they're in charge of QA. I think this is true in general, not necessarily true for all developers. I am a developer and I have a lot of fun doing QA. Expanding on one of the previous points, we've seen that most developers just don't enjoy doing QA. They see it as repetitive drudge work that doesn't make use of their most valuable skills. In the best cases, having developers do QA creates organizational inefficiency because highly paid employees are doing something that less expensive employees could do. Isn't that great when they call you less expensive? In the worst cases, it leads to turnover because job satisfaction goes down. This reminds me of one of my pet peeves is when they call you resources. We need to assign some resources to this project. What am I, like a load of servers? I'm not a resource. I'm a person. Please talk about me as if I'm a person, because I am. Pet peeve. We've seen software teams try this approach again and again, and the end result is always the same. The developer's capacity and enthusiasm for doing effective QA wanes over time, and they stop maintaining tests. When the test suite becomes stale, they return bad results, so the team loses faith in the test and starts relying on ad hoc manual tests. Inevitably, this approach leads to a quality crisis that threatens the success of the product. So essentially, they aren't as enthusiastic about doing QA. Tests start breaking. When tests start breaking, it just goes downhill, and it goes downhill really fast, especially when you're a developer and you're incentivized to ship code, not necessarily incentivized to have working tests. The inevitable challenges of a siloed QA approach to product quality. When companies have a major quality crisis, like an important customer canceling a deal due to product instability, the most common reaction from companies is to flip to the other standard QA approach. If their developers were previously doing QA, then they typically switch to a siloed QA approach by either creating an internal siloed QA team or hiring an external QA vendor And in either case, they create a situation where the people who own QA are isolated from the rest of the product development team. We've talked about this a little bit on the channel about shift left testing, and that's definitely part of this. And I think they actually talk about that a little bit. So the problem of siloed QA is that it makes product development less efficient. In theory, having a dedicated QA team would help solve the issues above with misaligned incentives and resource allocation. QA specialists bring a different perspective to software testing than developers, as they tend to focus more on the overall customer experience than just whether the software is technically sound. Indeed, unlike developers, QA specialists are measured based on the amount of quality assurance work they do, i.e. the number of bugs found, not the quantity of software created. So in theory, this gets rid of those misaligned incentives. Now you have the QA team who is incentivized to do good QA work. In theory, this is good. But the biggest problem with this model comes from isolating ownership of QA to just the QA team. On the surface, that sounds reasonable because the QA team should own QA. But when you separate QA from all of the other aspects of product development, you end up creating a silo where QA is the only group that is incentivized to care about quality. No one else's job description involves QA because there's a separate team that owns it. You wouldn't expect product managers to own code quality. Developers own code quality. So you wouldn't expect QA or product managers to own QA because QA owns QA. This leads to situations where developers know that they're not the last line of defense against bugs, so they're potentially less conscientious about the cleanliness of their code. They're also not as punished if they mess things up because that's QA's job to check the bugs, not the developers. The developer's job is to write the code. Well, the developer's job is to write code that works. QA is there just to prevent, to double check the developer's code. Anyway, subsequently, more debugging gets added to the development process, and tech debt adds up since there's not enough bandwidth to bash every bug. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, a siloed QA team puts QA in charge of the release schedule instead of the developers. This leads to the second problem with having a siloed QA team. Bottlenecks are inevitable when QA comes last. In this setting, the strength of people doing QA are dedicated specialists who think about the product critically from the customer's perspective, find bugs, and improve the product overall. Seemingly, these people are the ideal ones to manage product quality. But often, QA isn't included in the decision-making process about product changes. Wish I could highlight that 5 million. I can't even do it once. I can't do it. There. That's important. Because they're not invited into product discussions, they have no ability to anticipate product changes, so new features invariably break their test cases. That grinds my gears. When you write your test suite and it finally starts working, and then the developers push an update and it breaks everything, and you have to spend the next week trying to figure out what they changed, why it broke. Is it something in my code? Is it something in their code? What did they change? Why is this not working? Oh my gosh, now I'm holding up the release. This is so stressful. The QA team then has to pause the release of the new features until they can update those tests. If they're lucky. If they're not lucky, then it just gets shipped, and now we have bugs in production. If the product team and developers decide releases can't wait on QA to catch up, hey, that's what I just said, more features are released, breaking more tests. This puts QA even farther behind as more bugs make it into production. Through no fault of the QA team, the organization loses faith in the QA process. That's very important. The system was set up to fail. Nothing you could have done changed that. So, yeah, it was just inevitable. Because the quality of the product is perceived to be worsening. Even when QA is looped into the product specification and roadmapping process, it takes time to create and update the tests that validate new and changing features. Indeed, the ongoing test updates or test maintenance required to keep up with evolving features is often an underappreciated cost of executing QA. There was an article, actually there's this graph that shows like manual testing is this flat line, and then QA testing is like this line, or maybe it's like that as far as like level of effort. And so the manual testing level of effort stays the same, but for automated testing, the level of effort is high at the beginning and then drops below the manual testing effort throughout time. that's not necessarily true, because as you're creating more tests, you have to maintain those tests. Test maintenance is a real issue. It's one of the bigger issues, and it is very underappreciated how much test maintenance costs. And so while the effort may drop below manual testing using automation, it's not going to keep dropping forever. Test maintenance, every test you add is a test that you have to maintain, and that's extra effort. Time spent creating and maintaining test cases is time spent not testing product releases. When QA comes last in the development process, this means QA can become a bottleneck for the developers trying to deploy code. So basically they're saying even with shift left testing, QA still becomes a bottleneck, and that's a problem because QA is holding up releases and slowing down product management, all the forces trying to push the release forward, and it's just this very uneasy, just like I was going to say, if I can scroll to it, very uneasy tension. Siloing QA creates unnatural tension that hurts the company. The nature of software development naturally includes some trade-off between speed and test coverage, but in the siloed QA model, developers become focused on speed and QA specialists become focused on test coverage. Developers might say, we're not shipping fast enough because QA is too slow, and QA might say, well, we could ship faster if you didn't write so many bugs. This kind of contention between developers and QA only leads to losing outcomes for the company. If developers eager to ship code without full QA approval get their way, product quality suffers. But if QA successfully bottlenecks releases to assure product quality, developers naturally get frustrated and consider leaving the company because QA is just too much of a bottleneck. I can't do what I need to do. Ultimately, the siloed approach to QA fails because it creates a lose-lose power struggle between people who primarily want to ship fast and people who primarily want to ship with quality. You can have this fight within a single team. As long as there's a good team dynamic, you can have this fight within yourself of the trade-off between the two. But when you have two teams that are very separate, it's going to lead to really poor communication, backstabbing, all the politics that come along with that sort of warring principles and warring priorities. So here's the Rainforest QA solution, is to put QA in the hands of people responsible for business outcomes with no-code automated testing. So I said I wasn't going to talk about Rainforest QA, but I am going to talk about what they propose, this no-code automated testing idea. So they've established the two common approaches to QA, either owned by developers or owned by siloed QA personnel, are ultimately unhealthy for product development and for the company. In the real world, many people in the company care about product quality, but not all roles are incentivized to prioritize quality over other goals. So who should own product quality? Roles that are already held accountable for the business outcomes of the product. So roles that have to internally balance speed with quality. Whereas developers are mainly pushed towards speed, QA is mainly pushed towards quality. There's roles that are pushed towards both at equal rates. In theory, product teams have the right incentive to care about QA. So they're saying product teams, like product managers and such. The best results come when product teams own QA. We consider product teams to include roles that are evaluated on business outcomes created by their product. I think that's the key, business outcomes. It's the end users, whether there's money going into the bank to pay for everybody. That's, as they say, the buck stops there. That is, the roles incentivized to care about customers having a successful product experience. So you have product managers, product designers, QA specialists, developers, customer success managers. These are the people who have the right incentives. You see QA specialists and developers are still in there. These are the people in the company already spending most of their time thinking about what's right for the product, for the feature roadmap, the user flows, and the product design. When they have direct control over quality assurance, the people with the best set of information can make the right trade-offs between speed and test coverage to meet goals. I don't know why I didn't highlight that. That's pretty important. People with the best set of information can make the right trade-offs. That's so important, getting the right trade-off down. The age-old answer to whether you should use something or not, or whether you should make a certain decision is, it depends. It really just depends. Also, like many of the most skilled QA specialists, product team members bring their product expertise and real-world considerations to the testing lifecycle. When they test new features, they don't just run happy path tests to make sure the software works in most basic scenarios. They evaluate whether the end-to-end user experience makes sense, works properly, and helps customers be successful. So, why don't most software companies assign QA responsibility to product teams? The simple answer is that without no-code test automation, it's just not feasible. While product managers are a natural fit for QA, they lack the right tools. Most popular test automation solutions on the market are WebdriverIO and WebdriverIO. They require a dedicated QA engineer or developer to code every new test and every test update in response to the product changes. These code-based automation solutions prevent more of the company from taking ownership of QA. It really wasn't WebdriverIO, it was Selenium and Cypress. Those are the most popular tools. I'll admit that. Specifically, in many software companies that haven't matured to the point of having a formal approach to QA, product managers often serve as de facto QA. That's an interesting statement considering they don't write test automation. Why is that? Well, many of the product managers don't know how to code, and it's not a worthwhile investment for them to learn. Where did they put that? So as a result, what we've seen time and again is product managers scrambling to manually test new features whenever the team releases updates. When they find bugs, they fire off Slack messages or emails to the developers. So basically, they're doing QA. It's just manual. This manual, unstructured approach is unsustainable for many reasons, but two worth noting are, since this is informal QA, it wasn't incorporated into the release workflow, and the bugs don't get fixed until the next release, so customers encounter unresolved bugs in production, which is bad. There's a bug on Pocket, which is I'm using to highlight, where it won't highlight my articles, like it won't save my highlights, and that drove me nuts because I spent like 15 minutes highlighting this article, and I went to do this video, and none of my content is highlighted anymore. That was not fun. They still haven't fixed it as far as I know. Fixing bugs found later in feature development process is dramatically more costly in terms of expensive developer time than fixing bugs earlier in the process. You've probably seen this chart that shows the relative cost of fixing defects. I don't know what 100 stands for. I don't know what one, like what is that unit? It's a chart. It's representative of a general truth, but maybe not the most accurate thing. But still, the point is it's really expensive to fix bugs after release. If the product team members had the right tools to contribute to QA before updates go live, and I think that's the important part, contribute to QA, not write the QA themselves, but to contribute to it, they'd be an ideal fit for the job. To empower the right people to own QA, that is, the people who are in the best position to make the right trade-offs between speed and quality, you need an automated testing platform that doesn't require engineering skills. You need a solution that removes all the technical barriers, allowing anyone to quickly create, update, and run tests and to understand test results, and provides the speed of automation that developers need to deploy fast and frequently. So what they call this is accessible quality. When technical barriers are removed, allowing anyone to participate in the QA process, we call the resulting democratization of QA accessible quality. We've built it at Rainforest QA, and we'll explain how in a moment, but they define accessible quality as anyone who cares about quality can create, update, and run automated tests without a technical background. It's a pretty cool idea. I like it. Without accessible quality, if you aren't a developer or a QA specialist, you have much less of a meaningful ability to contribute to quality. But with accessible quality, a software company can distribute ownership of quality to all the people who want or need to be involved in QA, the people who have the best insights about the product and are responsible for its outcomes can manage testing according to the best trade-offs between speed and coverage. Again, they go back to manage the trade-offs. This is where they go into Rainforest QA, and I just wanted to show this is what it looks like. So they've got your actions here, the selectors here, the values, and all that kind of stuff into the page itself. So They can keep going on about Rainforest QA, which is their prerogative. I mean, this is their article that they wrote, and they wrote it for a reason, which is to sell their product. So it's good that they, showcase their stuff. Yeah, they kind of reiterate the same concepts. So that was the article. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it took an honest look at the problems with QA and who owns QA. And I think they propose a neat little solution. I don't know how well Rainforest QA works. I've not tested it myself. I swear maybe I had somebody on the channel showing it off at some point in time. I've done a couple no-code or low-code test automation videos. So I think it's a really neat idea. Maybe it needs to mature a little bit more. Maybe it's matured enough that it is workable. Take a look at it if you are interested in it. And but that sums up the article. Let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, have fun testing.